Watching TV on the go. Slime with your TV. Building bridges.
Developments that have happened in a couple of weeks or a week ago. We want to thank you, fellow scribes, colleagues from the civil society, for coming to this joint press statement by ZIM Rights, NGO, Human Rights Forum, and MISA Zimbabwe and its support partners, being Action Aid and MPOI and the European Union. Thank you very much. Our press conference will be led by our spokesperson for this joint statement. In this case, it's Blessing, who is with me as the Executive Director of NGO Human Rights Forum. To the far left being OK, Machisa, the Executive Director of ZIM Rights, and myself, Tawani Moyo, the Director of MISA Zimbabwe. Without wasting much of your time, I'll leave the platform to Blessing.
Thank you very much. I hope you will hear me if I put the mic down, because it's a bit disruptive. Yes, I'll read out our statement, which we are going to issue today as a press release, and thereafter we can entertain questions. So this is a press statement that we are releasing in response to the signing by the government of Zimbabwe some 2 weeks ago in Rwanda of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. So the Media Institute of Southern Africa in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Association, and the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum welcomed the signing of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance by the Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa on the 21st of March 2018 at the sidelines of the recently held African Union Extraordinary Summit held in Kigali, Rwanda. This is a positive step towards the conduct of elections in Zimbabwe, and in particular the imminent 2018 general elections. The Charter is the main normative instrument to set standards for better governance in Africa. It was adopted on the 30th of January 2007 and came into force in February 2017. As of September 2017, the Charter has been signed by 45 member states to the African Union and ratified by 30 out of the 55 member states to the African Union. It sets out international standards of good governance and democracy in such areas as rule of law, free and fair elections, and condemning unconstitutional changes of government. The Charter is the first legal instrument adopted by member states of the African Union that acknowledges that an unconstitutional change of government includes any amendments to the Constitution or legal instruments of a member state that infringe on the principles of democratic change of government. Many African heads of state have amended their constitutions in a bid to remain in power. Locally, following the events of 15 November 2017, the unconstitutional change of government has become a topical issue. This is why it is important to press home the importance of adopting the Charter into our local law. However, the adoption will not happen if there is no political will to implement the provisions and principles enshrined in this Charter. By signing this Charter, state parties pledge to develop the necessary legislative and policy frameworks to establish and strengthen a culture of democracy and peace. State parties also pledge to establish public institutions which promote democracy and constitutional order. While we welcome the government's will towards abiding by regional obligations, we urge the government of Zimbabwe to make further steps towards the ratification and domestication of the Charter in line with Section 327 of the Constitution. Section 327, subsection 2 in particular, states that the international treaties signed by the President can only be binding on Zimbabwe after the Parliament of Zimbabwe approves them. Furthermore, provisions of such treaties do not become part of Zimbabwean law until an Act of Parliament has incorporated those provisions into our local law. In light of this, Parliament must do two things before the provisions of the Charter can be binding on Zimbabwe. That is, firstly, Parliament must approve the President's decision to sign this Charter. Secondly, Parliament must pass an act which gives effect to the provisions contained in the Charter. Once such an act is gazetted, Zimbabweans can rely on the Charter to pressure government into promoting democracy, a robust electoral process, and good governance practices. It is therefore not enough that the president has signed this charter. We urge the government of Zimbabwe to take the easy and necessary steps to ratify and domesticate the African Charter on Elections and Democracy and Good Governance. For it to be meaningful in the running of elections, Zimbabwe still has a long way to go in terms of creating an environment which promotes the timeless flow of accurate, up-to-date information between government and other state organs and the ordinary citizens and residents of Zimbabwe. We also call upon Parliament to act urgently to incorporate provisions of this charter into domestic law. This is important because this charter seeks to promote and protect universal values and principles of democracy and respect for human rights within the African Union state parties. It is important at this juncture to call to mind other instruments that have been signed and shelved off by the government in the past. We thus call upon the government to ratify the protocol that establishes the African Charter, the African Court on Human and People's Rights. You realize that this African protocol was actually signed and came into effect on the 9th of June 2018, thus making it 2 full years. But sadly, nothing has been done in those 2 decades to pass an act or to ratify this protocol so that Zimbabwean citizens can have access to the African Court on Human and People's Rights. We call upon our colleagues in civil society working in the areas of elections, governance and human rights to work tirelessly in raising awareness on the signing of this important instrument, that is the African Charter on Elections and Democracy in Africa, and its various requisite principles, and to press for its implementation and enforcement. For the generality of the people of Zimbabwe, it therefore goes without saying that the implementation of the Charter's principles are a cause worth fighting for until victory is won. Our prayers and efforts should therefore ensure that this present charter does not suffer the same fate as the protocol to the African Court. And therefore, we urge the government to expedite the process of ratification and domestication of the principles that are enshrined in the African Charter on Elections in democracy. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I think we will entertain questions.
It appears like the previous government of Robert Mugabe that it is legitimate. Then in comes an illegitimate government, if I can use those words, that word. And so far the distance or the amount of work that the Mnangagwa government has done towards democratization, I would argue and say it's modest. So what can you say in a situation where an illegitimate government is somewhat trying to be more democratic than a democratic government? Are we better now, post-Mugabe, or the situation is the same? I can quickly cite the signing of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission bill into law. Mugabe was sitting on that. In comes Mnangagwa, an illegitimate president, who signs it into law. And we've seen a few moves on the part of the new president to democratize the situation, so to speak. So what can you say if you compare the 2 regimes?
I'll take 2 additional questions. And please direct your questions to one of the 3 or to all or both. Another question? Thank you. Colleagues?
Well, it's a very good question. We all participated in ensuring that Robert Mugabe is off from the government, including the person that asked this question. I think we were together in the streets, ensuring that. But look, the most important port of call is to try and regulate everything so that it gets into a recognized constitutional legal process. So I would say at this moment, the most important part that we are applauding is anything that is very legal, anything that is democratic, and if there is any signing that signs towards freedom, free, fair elections within the country of Zimbabwe, as done by President Mnangagwa, the way he came to run the country, we are all aware, and I think it is all upon us to legitimize it through the elections that are coming. The steps that are being taken are quite impressive, and we hope the people of Zimbabwe will realize that things that are right should be applauded. Things that are wrong should not be applauded. At this moment, the reason probably why we are addressing you is to make a recognition and an acknowledgement that the president signed the African Charter. What is remaining is for the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the good work that is supposed to be done so that we can enjoy elections, democracy, and human rights in our country. I would not think, because I am still facing the same challenges that we used to have. So we are in a process of getting somewhere, and I think we cannot say we are better, but we cannot say we are at the same level that we were in the time of Robert Mugabe.
Thank you very much. Any other question? I'll start here and then at the back.
Thank you, colleagues. Mine is just a question to the effect that has there been any roadmap that has been pronounced by the government or by the state in terms of the domestication of the asset? We know it was signed by the country, by the state, especially by our president. But we're also curious in terms of what are the steps, the building blocks towards the domestication. And we know, of course, with the elections coming sometime in July, later on this year, there may not be enough space for the domestication to occur. But what then will ensure that there will be free, fair, and credible elections in the after the elections? So I think my question is in two parts.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is there are a number of laws that are being currently aligned with the new constitution. How urgent and priority is the ratification and domestication of the African Charter?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Panel,
Okay.
you are free to choose the
Questions.
the easier task for you.
Okay, I'll go first. I think in terms of the roadmap, this is an event that took place on the 21st. And apart from just the notification that the president has signed, we are yet to hear in terms of how they are planning to roll out. But like we have indicated already in our statement, we have constitutional provisions that facilitates for the adoption and incorporation of international treaties once they have been signed, and also the process of ratification, which has to be approved by the parliament. So it has to be tabled in parliament and then have it approved for it to be then ratified by the government. And beyond that, our constitution then stipulates that once ratified, it has to be domesticated. But I would want to underscore the fact that you realize that from the principles that are enshrined in the charter, these are not abstract principles. These are principles that we have already incorporated in our constitution in terms of facilitating for, a democratic order, in terms of facilitating for free and fair elections, in terms of facilitating for greater respect for human rights. So we are not bringing in a foreign concept here. We are simply restating what we have already agreed to as demonstrated by our current constitutional order. What international standards then helps to do is to then enhance in terms of sharing, best practices and consolidating, good governance policies within the region. But otherwise, what we are basically saying and restating, which is what is incorporated in this charter, is not something that is new to us. It's not a foreign concept. It's something that we have already agreed to in terms of our current constitution. That, I think, will also partly address the last question in terms of how urgent and how perhaps feasible in light of the current circumstances and the short, period that we are faced before perhaps we hold the next elections. We will continue to underscore that the same mechanisms that we've already agreed to, that have already been provided for by our constitution, should be respected, should be enforced, should be upheld. I think that's our statement.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that is that a very hungry person obviously would need to get food. You cannot go for more kilometers without feeding this person. So naturally, it's urgent. We are very hungry of democracy in Zimbabwe. We are very hungry of a free, fair, and a credible election. So at the end of the day, if you go to Chapter 7 of the African Charter, it talks about democratic elections. If you go again to Chapter 8, it talks about bringing how to address an unconstitutional government. So in the event that we are faced with the scenario of November last year, we need these things to be addressed. This is what I'm saying. We are hungry, and therefore we are hungry, we are thirsty, we need food, we need water.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And also to underscore the point that pertaining to the laws, the question on the laws, it is a given that the government has not met expectations in terms of addressing the key issue of law alignment to the constitutional charter. And these are low-hanging fruits which test the genuineness of the ruling establishment on whether they are readily available to effect wholesale changes, including ratification and ensuring that the charter becomes a living reality together with the crop of our laws in the country. So part of our impressing mechanism is to say, show goodwill by doing those that are not costly, like aligning the laws to the new charter and moving with speed to ratify and ensuring that Parliament puts a seal to the whole process, and that we enjoy, like any other nation which is in the continent or in the globe, modern ways of running elections, modern ways of governing a people, and creating a very competitive and robust social contract between the governed and those that are governing. I don't know if there are additional questions. I'll then take my last round. Here's the first one. Any other taker? Going once, second one, going twice, going thrice. I think these are our two last questions. Thank you.
Do you think that the ratification, the domestication, and probably the implementation of the ASDE will be the panacea to the country's governance or democracy deficits, given the fact that for economies to flourish, there certainly needs to be good governance. And good governance, therefore, is the precursor to socio-economic transformation in every setting. So maybe the long and short is, do you foresee the ratification, implementation, being the panacea of the country's current laws?
Thank you.
We are entering the home stretch of the current end, so to speak. And MPs are basically in election mode, for better word. Do you find a situation where MPs, the Parliament, has committed itself fully to ratify this particular instrument, given that they are already in a situation, in a mode where they are fighting for their political lives on the eve of a crucial election?
Thank you. Colleagues, pick the easier for you.
Okay, viewing the ratification and the subsequent domestication, and I like the point that you emphasize on implementation, because I think ratification and domestication on its own is not sufficient unless we have shown greater political will towards enforcing and implementing the provisions, whether it's a panacea to our ills that we are facing right now. I think when you look at the charter itself, it's holistic. It's actually based on the universal values that AU has agreed to, as demonstrated in the Constitutive Act. These are universal values of greater respect for human rights, universal values towards citizen participation, universal values towards independence of the judiciary, universal values towards security and development, economic integration, every other aspect that you would want to think of that can enhance greater, democracy and the consolidation of good governance in a country. So it's our fervent hope that if the government is to demonstrate that expected political will by ratifying and also subsequent implementation and enforcement of this particular roadmap that the AU has come up with, it would then, I think, go a long way in addressing most of the challenges that we are currently facing right now. Again, like I've already alluded to, these are principles that we already have in our constitution, meaning there is that realization that these are key tenets that every member state of the AU must subscribe to. And in addition to that, there's something that is called customary international law, which are universally acknowledged and agreed to principles by all states across the globe. To say that, I think as a basic principle, we should subscribe to these values. And most of the values that this charter is seeking to enhance and consolidate are actually constituting those key prerequisite customary law values. So we are saying even if it doesn't ratify and approve in the near future, there's nothing that can stop our government from incorporating and being influenced and informed by the same values that this charter is seeking to promote and consolidate. So that would be my response.
Maybe in response to your question, if I had my way, I would actually say to the people of Zimbabwe, don't vote for any member of parliament before they ratify this thing, if I had my way. But because I don't have that way, the only thing to indicate is that there is need for political will. Ratification of this thing can take one week. The parliament would be done with it. So it will not take ages if there is political will to ensure that this is ratified. So I would actually say political parties they have always whipped their members of parliament. This can be done in a week, 2 weeks. Am I wrong?
That's very possible.
Very possible. So it's all to do with political will from the top leadership of political parties, because I understand everybody who is pro-democratic would want this to be enshrined within our domestic laws.
Thank you very much. As my colleagues have alluded to, this is the ratification or signing of the charter is not an end in itself, but it's the beginning of the journey. It's a means towards the end. The end is that our documents, our legal instruments, both imported and those that are domestic, will shape the way in which we are governed, the way in which we contribute towards the development of the country. And in our situation, we insisted that a country is more informed and beneficial to its citizens when it has got democratic pieces of legislation. Like in this situation, the signed charter, if ratified, it will then create an enabling environment for the people of Zimbabwe to effectively engage with the establishment and government, starting at local level to national level, and also how it relates at international fora. The second tier of questions is tied up to Nkosana's question. Are MPs going to take this issue seriously? Definitely, we are saying that Parliament has got a burden to defend the Constitution. That's its primary role before it is that of creating laws. But it's supposed to defend the Constitution. And when you've got you have signed on behalf of the country instruments that are supposed to be domesticated, it is Parliament's duty to work 24/7 towards seeing that they become a reality. At the moment, Parliament is off session back in May, which leaves May to July as probably the only time frame that they have towards ensuring that the whole process is completed. If you ask me, I will then say we have got between May and July to align all the laws in this country. Firstly, to the Constitution. Secondly, to ensure that this new burden to the Constitution is a living reality. So it is incumbent upon the members of the civil society, members of the media, to perform a strong oversight role, not only in seeing that they are aligned to the new constitution and that they are also part of the global standards and instruments, but to ensure that the time frame that it happens leaves space for testing before we go into an election. Without testing it, we can't come up with a law and then amend the laws, align them on the eve of an election. You do not have given the people of Zimbabwe space to enjoy or to get informed information for informed decision making. So we want that space to be given due consideration. That when we are doing the wholesale process, leave space for testing, and then we get into the election with adequate time for observers to also monitor and observe the whole process. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Your views and comments are welcome on the program. Remember to like our Facebook page and our YouTube channel and be the first to see as it happens. Watching TV on the go. ZimdiTv, building bridges.